Hi, everyone. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here today. So, I would like to start off by telling you a little bit about myself. Actually, let's scratch that. Who are you? Who are you? And who are you? I'll expand that question once more further, and I'll ask, who are we? We are Homo sapiens. We are just one of perhaps 10 million species, and that's likely an underestimate, that share space on this tiny little planet. And I've got news. It really is a small world, after all. So life is pretty unique on this tiny, tiny planet, and that makes me wonder, what's to be said about all these other life forms that we share space with? The more we think about what life actually is, the more bizarre and precious the concept seems to become. Life requires this input of energy. It grows, repairs itself, maintains itself, and it also reproduces. So where else in the infinite vastness of our universe is this even happening? We don't know. It's truly mind-boggling. So no matter what your personal beliefs may be, there's no doubting that life on Earth is about as unique as concepts come. So if that's the case, then why are we allowing this to happen to the extent that it does? If life on Earth can be viewed as one of the most extraordinary concepts to our brilliant human brains, then why are we not performing at a higher recognition to protect it? I found this on one of my late-night internet adventures. Get your mind out of the gutter. This is an area of deforestation in the Amazon rainforest, and to me, it looks both physically and metaphorically like a removal of the lung of the Earth. So I grew up in Niagara on the Lake, Ontario, right along the Niagara Escarpment. As a little kid, I looked forward to the first really warm days of spring because these adorable little reptiles called garter snakes would emerge from hibernation to mate. I absolutely loved these creatures. I'd play with them all the time. But even as a kid, I appreciated them for their very existence alone, without even having a concept of what existence even really is, because I knew that snakes didn't do anything for me or for my family. However, they had inherent value. And I started to notice these connections that are invisible until otherwise put into action. These snakes needed food, they needed water, they needed shelter, they needed a way to defend themselves, which is really stinky. And also, they had this invisible driving force to reproduce. Wait a minute. That sounds a little bit like us, doesn't it? So these animals still are my pride and my joy and my passion. So snakes led me to frogs, frogs led me to streams, and streams led me up and down the Niagara Escarpment. I was hooked at a young age to this super interconnected system called life. So let's fast forward through grade school, high school, puberty, life in general, and here I am today to tell you about why we need to live in a biophilic world. A what world? A biophilic world. Let's break down the word. So bio, meaning life, and philic is more or less the opposite of phobic or phobia. So to like, to have a tendency towards, to have a fondness towards. So this is an extraordinary concept that we have to wrap our heads around, and it's a concept that recognizes we are a part of nature and not apart from nature. There's a big difference. The sooner we realize this, the better off it'll be for every other species on this planet, as well as our very own future generations. So this is why 2 years ago, I started my own little nonprofit organization called just that. It's called Biophilic World. Its motto stands as people helping people help the natural world. Isn't it wonderful to witness a community like here today come together to help a community? And in the big scheme of things, it's all one big community. And this is what living in a biophilic world is all about. It's a mindset. It's a movement that has a need to be spread amongst our daily lives. So that makes me think, though. People have this tendency to have a what's in it for me approach to life. A lot of us do. And in that, we know that the wetlands of the world filter our water and prevent flooding. We know that the world's forests produce oxygen that is necessary for us to breathe. So in saying that, someone might cry out, oh no, don't drain the wetlands because we need that for flood control and filtering our town's water supply. Yes, this may be true, and you can't argue that, but living in a biophilic world encourages us to look one step further beyond just ourselves and what's in it for us. What is the inherent value of a place or a species? Why does a place or a species need judgment from us in order for us to dictate its survival or integrity? It doesn't really seem fair or make much sense when we are just another species amongst 10 million. There's also a grave danger in throwing this symbol around in life and at nature. And if I'm not emphasizing the danger enough, right? So basically, this symbol does not represent the future consequences of our current actions. Also, money comes and goes. I'm a student, I know that. However, tropical forests, coral reefs, and species, once they are gone or extinct, they do not simply come and go. They're gone forever. And these sorts of mindsets, I feel like, are what are driving the strange relationship we've created between this and this. This is the Ecuadorian Amazon rainforest, where the Amazon meets the Andes Mountains. They say this is the most biodiverse place on the planet. This place pulses life. It is absolutely unreal. We know so little about it, we need it, and we are losing it very fast. And that is just one example from one little corner of the world. So in essence, what has happened is modern Homo sapiens have showed up to this life scene in an evolutionary sense in a very, very untimely and late fashion. We really just arrived in the big picture. And not only that, we then dominated the scene, we trashed the scene, and then we left a mess for someone else to clean up. The last time I saw this was at a university party, and I can tell you, nobody was pleased. So it is my biggest mind game and my biggest passion to figure out, quite appropriately, how to bridge the gap between the rest of us and nature, when quite ironically, that gap has been created by none other than ourselves. So I wonder, is it aesthetics, for example, that do the job? Do we need the oohs and ahs and oh my gods in order for us to appreciate nature a little bit more? Or is it relatability? Consider the chimpanzee. It has 98.2% of its genome or genetic code the exact same as ours. And if you watch them long enough, not only do they look a bit like us, they also act a lot like us too. So do we need to pull at the heartstrings in order for us to care a little bit more? Or does it all trickle back down to the what's in it for me approach? It's hard to even consider how we can bridge these gaps when we are so distracted though. It might be by that thing that's vibrating in your pocket all day, every day. It might be by that TV show that we desperately rush home to at the end of the day because we absolutely have to watch it. It might be trying to get that car that gets you there faster, louder, sleeker, sexier. Or it might be the insurmountable rat race to the top of the economic pile that keeps us focused on none other than just ourselves. Well, I hope those comments didn't offend anybody or make anyone feel a little uncomfortable in this room. And I'm sorry if they did, but not really. Because this is just proof that we have a big issue on our hands, and I have got some news for you. I may be seen as a tree hugger, but no matter what your interests, your passions, or your hobbies, it doesn't matter. You need a healthy environment, and so does every other living thing on the face of this planet. And this is an extraordinarily large issue that does not discriminate, and it will unite us all for better or for worse, depending on how we act. And it's tough for us to wrap our head around that concept when our immediate priorities and offenses are so interesting. So, we are excited or bothered by a celebrity's butt making the rounds on world news and social media. We jump right on it. We're offended by someone wearing the wrong shirt to the wrong event. We're offended by somebody else's political or religious views, and we're offended by an individual smoking marijuana or a politician who said a bad word. But in the big scheme of things, not too many of us seem terribly offended or knowledgeable of this. And if this picture doesn't quite adequately sum up our current relationship with the planet and its other rightful inhabitants, then I don't know what does. So as you could have guessed, these are the sorts of things that I think about day in and day out, and I decided I wanted to take some appropriate action towards it and make a difference. So I was tired of waiting on a childhood dream, and I knew that I wanted to hike the Bruce Trail, which is 885 kilometers long, in one shot from start to finish. It runs from Tobermory, Ontario to Queenston, or Queenston to Tobermory, depending how you look at it. And I wanted to raise both funds and awareness for the local environment, and on top of that, for our disabled community. So the realities of, oh, I need a job, oh, I don't have time, always held me back at the last second. However, I decided to create my own reality, and I decided that I do have a job, and the time is right here and right now. I knew I'd be hiking in the spring of 2014. So the word got out, the funds started to trickle in, and I trained like a madman. Seriously, like a madman. I had a full course load at university of courses that admittedly I could have cared less about. I was working night shifts right here in downtown, and I found myself training at the wee hours of the morning past midnight when the rest of the city was cold and asleep. I can't believe I did it. I actually don't know how I managed my time. I can barely do it now. So this is interesting because I'd show up to class some mornings, and my one friend here today, Sean, but basically in one way or another remind me that I look like shit. Thank you, Sean. So the training and perseverance had paid off because April 28th came knocking at the door, and I stepped outside of a hotel room in Tobermory, Ontario, and I looked outside and I saw rain coming down sideways. It was 5 degrees Celsius, and there was still ice on the harbor. So I remember my mom saying to me very specifically, you know, you can just start tomorrow. No one has to know. It's okay. But I thought, I have 37-something days ahead of myself, and not every day is going to be peaches and cream with regards to hiking. I may as well start now. I had a message to deliver home where the Bruce Trail ends, almost literally right in my hometown backyard. So in that, I approached the starting cairn, I touched it, and took my first few steps away. And that's when I thought, this is where the journey truly begins. So what is to be said about wilderness? What does that word mean to you when it hits your ears? Wild, pristine, remote, untouched, uncharted, the unknown. Ooh. However, to me, wilderness seems like nature uncensored. It is absolutely amazing. So when I went through these sorts of places, I would stop and I would pause and I'd get very present and I would think to myself, I am just one member of one other species sharing space, matter, and time with everything that is around me. I am amidst the flow, the energy, the cell division, and the chaos of Mother Nature. And that is a very, very powerful experience and a very humbling experience. It gives us a sense of where we belong in the world and what part of it we more or less belong to. Here is a picture of the trail conditions that I faced on day 1. And that lasted until about day 7 for that matter. But it rained a lot, and it seemingly rained from the ground up, you would swear at times. It was very, very hard to stay warm and dry. So by the time day 5 had rolled around, so had the next storm system. Or from what I could tell, at least, it was all the same storm system, just coming back for more every time, every time, every time. So it was getting a little bit draining, but I kept my head up, but I could not get warm. I tried everything. I tried doing push-ups in a cave. I shoveled beef jerky into my mouth. I put on extra layers, and this whole getting warm gig was simply not happening. So eventually, I had to call my emergency contacts, David and Penny, who I will raise my invisible glass to and say, thank you, David and Penny, if you're listening, because they took me into their house for 24 hours and let me heal up because I had come down with hypothermia. So after I'd healed up, I got back on the trail, and I felt alive. And how can you not when you're faced with this kind of scenery? Gatorade blue water, imposing cliffs, and spellbinding cedar forests. Now, what isn't so spellbinding is my rear end, and it never was to begin with. Let's get that straight. However, post-hypothermia has a funny way of making you wonder, where's the nearest toilet? And there are no toilets in nature. So I remember camping out in the bottom of this big bog, and I found the driest spot I could down there to stay. And I awoke to my butt, sending messages to my head, saying, you have 10 seconds to get out of the tent. You have 10 seconds. So, behold, at some ungodly hour of the morning, in all my nakedness, I scampered out of the tent, into the dark, into the rain, where I grabbed a tree and I gave back to the earth. Now, hold on a second. Isn't that representative of our current relationship with the planet? What if in the form of species loss, climate change, and natural resource degradation, the Earth is screaming, you have 10 seconds left, and what if we're not acting fast enough? What if I didn't act fast enough? It would have been only moments before I was caught in a situation that is not only irreversible, but entirely unpleasant. If I'd not heeded the warnings properly and acted properly, it would have been only a matter of time before I wouldn't be able to escape my very own waste. And that, to me, seems parallel to the representation of the planet and our relationship with it. And we're either heading there or we're already there. So we have to be very, very careful and mindful. So after leaving the wilderness areas of the hike behind, I took their lessons with me. The good news is you don't have to be finding yourself like this or for being cold and wet for 7 days straight in order to gain great lessons from nature. All you have to do is go to it, because I promise you, and I know some of you in this room know already, it delivers. All you have to do is just go. I then entered a phase of the hike where I encountered several days of surreal natural beauty. Now, anybody here with the camera knows that the pictures in the camera simply do not do it justice, nor do even just your eyes. But when you are open and receptive with all of your senses to what nature has to offer, you can feel invigorated, excited, energized, calm, de-stressed, or just plain happy. It is no wonder that nowadays doctors are prescribing nature time to their clients, because nature is a place where everything is happening all of the time. Where else in our increasingly man-made world do we get this kind of richness delivered to us? We just don't anymore, but nature has it. And for any of you in this room who have felt that sort of sensation before, or any of the mentioned sensations I just went over, this is just proof that as Homo sapiens, we are a part of nature and we belong in it. I absolutely had to sneak this photo in because it's just too adorable not to. How many people knew we had tree frogs here in Ontario? This is a gray tree frog, and I found this on my hike, and I remember picking this animal up and just appreciating it and thinking, this little thing that fits between two of my fingers has a brain, a beating heart, and every day it is making decisions to stay alive, just like you and I. So at this point through the hike, I had done well for myself, I believe. I was about 2/3 the way through, and Mr. Noodles and nature have served me very well. However, I may have beaten the black flies, but I barely beat the battle against mosquitoes. Sometimes I would spend nearly half my day in a trot like this, and the backpack was several times heavier then too, and I'd try and distance the mosquitoes behind me so they couldn't catch up. And need I say more, stopping for a washroom break was barely an option because they would find every bare bit of skin exposed. So I remember going through this massive swamp and then coming across a rural road that intersected it, and I found a Poutine truck. Am I hallucinating? There is heaven on earth, and it's in the form of poutine. It was probably the best thing I ever ate in my life. And that poutine seemed to be the divide between exploring what was once unknown to me and the home stretch of the hike, which is more familiar territory. I then entered this area of southern Ontario where there's like this quilt-like mosaic of agricultural lands, small towns, roads, and green spaces. This place here is a perfect example that, yes, we can coexist with our remaining green spaces. We do have the ability to do it. Nature gives to us as individuals, as we've been over, but it also gives to the whole community. And as we discussed earlier, it's one big community. Everything is connected. So this place here gets the services of fresh water, fertile soil, and biodiversity, which basically makes all those farm fields you see down below and feeds us. But we can also give back to nature by protecting it and promoting it to other people. Beautiful examples of private stewardship were seen all along this stretch of the hike. However, I started to see some familiar landmarks that perhaps I wasn't so happy to see at the time. The Toronto skyline, the humming highway. And the humming highway kind of made me feel a little bit uneasy. It has this sense of rush to it, this clock-watching atmosphere and pace that people keep up so we can get somewhere we need to be, or so we can get somewhere to make more money so we can go get our needs. And that made me think, we are the only aspect of nature that takes far more than it needs. Some food for thought. Another thing that crossed my mind on the home stretch is the variety of people that came to the forest. I saw one man in a decked-out business suit in the middle of the woods with one cigarette and a million thoughts on his mind. I saw lovers holding hands, perhaps for the first time, perhaps several years down the road. I saw kids being kids with scrapes on their knees and using a rope swing and swinging through the giant trees of the escarpment. And I saw my own age group come stumbling out of the bushes with big grins on their faces, only to offer me a beer and a friendly conversation. I said yes to both, as you can imagine. But this is just proof that anybody can go to the woods or nature for a biophilic connection. It's in us. It is innate. When I got to the provincial park that's very close to my home called Short Hills, I ended up camping in there for probably what was the 10th time in my life. But this time was different. It was very surreal. There were no gunshots in Short Hills Provincial Park that night. But I did think of other things, and here are the things. I heard these beautiful animals singing me to sleep for what was the 36th night in a row. And I thought to myself, I've made it so far, and I've learned so much. And this is very, very surreal to me. And as I got towards the finish line in my hometown, I met my brother Garrett there in his wheelchair. Excuse me. And I pushed him through the finish line. I think that was the happiest moment of both his life and mine. However, once I got to the end of the hike, I was going to touch the terminal to signify the end of my hike. I looked at the crowd that had gathered, and it was enormous. Friends, family, loved ones, sponsors, supporters. I looked back at them one last time, and I thought to myself, what have they learned from following this hike? What connections have they learned from keeping up with this trek I've been on? Was this one way to inspire people to live in a biophilic world? I then reached out and touched the cairn to signify the end of my hike, and that's when I realized this is where the journey truly begins. Thank you.